some in Chicago are on edge as President Trump signals National Guard troops will be headed there next. The governor of Illinois says it's part of the president's targeting of Democratic states and cities.
Chicago's a killing field right now, and they don't acknowledge it. And they say, we don't need them, freedom, freedom.
Go talk to the people of Chicago who are enjoying a gorgeous afternoon in this city and ask if they want their neighborhoods turned into a war zone by a wannabe dictator.
Over the weekend, National Guard troops deployed in Washington, D.C. began carrying pistols and rifles. They've been told to use them only for self-defense or as a last resort. President Trump has also mentioned New York, Oakland, and San Francisco as cities where he could deploy National Guard troops. Let's get some insight by turning, as we often do, to Professor Peter Loge at George Washington University. Thanks for being with us.
Always a pleasure.
The mayors of these cities say that the president has it all wrong. The crime is down, cities are on the upswing. How can the president act without their support?
Well, it's the National Guard, so he can deploy them in D.C. because he's in charge of the National Guard in D.C., at least for a limited amount of time. In other states, it's up to the governors. The president understands the power of political spectacle. It was real estate spectacle, then television, now politics. And this is a great spectacle. D.C. is a terrific prop. It's a great background, as is Oakland, San Francisco, and Chicago.
We've heard from Oaklanders and San Franciscans who say their cities aren't perfect, could use some help. What shape could a deployment take in those cities?
I think a deployment, at least as it's happening here in Washington, D.C., where I live, is a big show of force. And in some cases, it probably is decreasing crime, which a lot of us in D.C. appreciate. But there's not a question of what happens next. How do we prevent crime? If people go to prison when they come out, how do we make sure they don't go back to prison? Remind you of the old joke about Texas politics, where a candidate asks his opponent, "Have you stopped kicking your dog yet?" President Trump has now put Democratic mayors and governors in the position of either trying to defend crime or saying that, we actually need the troops, when the real question, I think, is what happens next, right? Of course, we want less crime. I would like less crime in my neighborhood. Yeah. I want to know how to prevent it over the long term, and I think that becomes an interesting policy debate once the spectacle is passed.
We'll get to the numbers in a second here. First, back to your personal experience. You live and work in D.C. What have you seen when it comes to National Guard troops there?
I've seen some presence of National Guard troops. I live in a part of town called Adams Morgan, and I walk to work here in Foggy Bottom at George Washington University. And I've seen some troops mostly milling about. The parts of town I work and live in don't tend to be really crime-ridden parts of town. I go to Audi Field to watch DC United, my beloved and beleaguered Major League Soccer team, play. And I've seen troops like getting ice cream and posing for pictures with tourists. We have crime in DC. It's a city. But I think the point mostly is the photo op, and you see this with troops carrying their own cameras and the president pushing out footage. It's a show of force rather than the impact of force. Good strategy asks what now, what next, and then what.
The White House
now is DC.
No, go ahead. Sorry, finish your thought.
No. So it's right now is DC. What next is Chicago, San Francisco. I think it's the then what that policy people are looking at. How do we prevent crime in the future?
The White House says that National Guard troops have made 1,000 arrests there in D.C. since they arrived in the past month, seized 111 firearms, arrested 6 known gang members, cleared dozens of homeless encampments. Is there concern that the Guard is acting above its authority?
I think there are lawsuits about that. Certainly the Attorney General of D.C. has sued about that. Homeless encampments are a challenge, as a public health challenge, but also people need a place to live. They need mental health services. And because you clean somebody out from living under a bridge, the question becomes, where do they go and what do they do next? And that isn't part of the show. Those are complicated policy problems that I hope the White House and the president is going to begin to address. Unfortunately, a lot of federal funding has been cut to address those problems. I think a lot of people are saying this is a compelling show. Yes, we need less crime, but what are you going to do about it over the long term? And I'm not sure we have answers to those questions yet.
Back to the personal. Outside of your job, when you're at, the grocery store talking with neighbors, have people largely accepted the National Guard in D.C., or are they still against it?
Everybody I know is against it. We feel like we don't need it. We feel like crime is coming down to Washington, D.C. It is. Violent crime is way down. The Republican Congress took $1 billion out of the D.C. budget, which makes it obviously harder to hire law enforcement and school teachers and everything else. 700,000 people live in Washington, D.C. Most of them aren't college professors or work in politics. My neighbors are architects. I know bartenders and grocery store clerks and teachers. And I think mostly they would like, obviously, less crime, but they want to know what are the real solutions. And nobody loves being a prop in somebody else's show. And that's what this can feel like a lot of the time.
All right, our time is up. Thank you so much, Professor Loge, Director of Media and Public Affairs at the George Washington University.
Thank you.